Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. I just read the news online that we lost Kevin O'Neill today. What an amazing talent. One of the greats of comics. Co-creator of Marshal Law. Co-creator of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Great collaborations with people like Pat Mills and Alan Moore. I had the pleasure of speaking with Kevin in 2009. That is the conversation that I am representing today. Some comments from some of our favorite people in comic books. Howard Chaykin, our field has lost a challenging and original perspective that can never be replaced. Dave Johnson, succinctly, that sucks, loved his work. Mark Wheatley, he was a major talent, excellent stylist, and wonderful storyteller. Cully Hamner, a true original if there ever was one. Yeah, and you know, God, I'm not kidding. In the last few weeks, I'm like, I should touch base with Kevin because, good Lord, that conversation was so long ago, and he's done so much more since then. And there's always new reasons to talk to these guys. That's why I'm always pleased when I have the opportunity to have them on multiple times, and we just get to know each other deeper. I'm really sorry that on a personal level, I didn't get to know Kevin O'Neill better, because again, I've always adored his work. Marshal Law, what a wonderful satire when it came out, and I still think about it today as really one of the best 80s comics that I encountered when I came back to comics during my college years. Just, again, what a tragedy, and the characters and designs that they came up with for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I mean, it's just amazing stuff. So I'm pleased to present my Word Balloon conversation with Kevin O'Neill to honor his life and legacy on today's Word Balloon. In association with Newsarama, welcome again to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. This is John Suntress. On this episode, I reach across the Atlantic and speak with artist Kevin O'Neill to discuss this month's release of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Volume 3, from Top Shelf, drawn by O'Neill and written by Alan Moore. Kevin discusses the background of the story and some of his views on past characters like Mr. Hyde, Mina Murray, the mysterious Orlando, and Captain Nemo. We'll also talk about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film and the origins and future plans of his co-creation with Pat Mills, Marshal Law. Now, this interview does cover some plot points and settings that have been discussed in other preview articles and reviews of the book, so beware. I understand this weekend you and Alan were at, was it just one store in London or several?
It was one store in London. It was Gosh in Bloomsbury in central London, and the signing went sensationally well. We were there for 5 hours, so it was, I think people were queuing for up to 3.5 hours. I put it down to the Alan Moore effect rather than any great desire to see me. It was fascinating. The people were incredibly good-natured, and some people have been waiting in the queue so long they'd had time to read the book before they got to us. So we were getting feedback almost at the point of just past the point of purchase. So it was good. The reaction's been very, very encouraging, because this book is different again to earlier ones, and like I say, it was it's a good start to what will be a series of signings now in Britain. As I understand it, the book is already on sale in the States, and it's a little later over here. It's got delayed by some shipping delay from the printers in Hong Kong. But that's all I know. I'm fairly certain it's on sale in America already.
Well, let's talk about the book. It takes place in 1910. I understand the anticipation is there for the coronation of King George V. And Halley's Comet, I know, is going to figure into the story, at least for this volume, correct?
Yes, it makes a guest appearance. Halley's Comet there. As a portent of doom really, as much as anything else. But the sort of stories which run kind of parallel to one another are there's an occult story. There's the sort of stories which run kind of parallel to one another are there's an occult story. There's an occult story. There's an occult story. There's the sort of stories which run kind of parallel to one another are there's the sort of stories which run kind of parallel to one another are there's the Captain Nemo's daughter, Janny, who cuts loose and finds herself in London, in the London Docklands. And there's the 1910 version of the League, which is Mina, Alan Quatermain, Orlando, who we featured in the Black Dossier, Carnacki, the Ghost Hunter, and Raffles, the gentleman cracksmith. So those are the new League for this who really only appear in this book, and the kind of Dockland story, which runs with the Janny, or Jenny as she is called later, Nemo's daughter. It's effectively a story of her father leaving her father. Nemo dies, and she assumes a new position by the end of the book, which is in a very I don't know much about the London Docklands, but I think in common with probably Docklands the world over, they're pretty hives of activity, very very sleazy, a lot of criminals, a lot of debauchery, and we've Alan's written kind of new versions of Brechtian songs, so there's a lot of singing in the book, which makes it very, very different and sort of rather wonderful as well. So yeah, the book is it's a very different sort of previous ones, and it's the first of three. Overall is called Century. The second one I'm doing now is set in 1969. It's absolutely fascinating to see principal characters in 60s. Just in 60s clothing alone is worth the price of admission. And then in the final book will be set in the present day and opens in Afghanistan, but a kind of a mixture of real and fictional things happening in Afghanistan. So brings us up to date.
I've heard Alan confess that he's not up on current pop culture. Are you kind of supplying some of the little Easter eggs as far as things that you should include?
I am. I think Alan underplays himself really, because I think he's more up on say Harry Potter than I am, for instance. So I think that's pretty modern pop culture.
Sure.
But yeah, I do as far as possible keep up with things, and we just have to tread a very careful line post 1910 of how we use well-known figures, shall we say? So it just has to become a bit more clever in using them. But it also does populate the book as we proceed with incredible numbers of different characters on the street scenes and in background and referenced on newspaper headlines and so on. Which is a lot of work, but because we got these Jess Nevin's books analyse every single panel, we realise that there are people who kind of like that. But if you don't recognise who people are, what a reference is, for the most part, it doesn't spoil your enjoyment of a story. It still works as a story. It's just another layer of fictional stuff going on alongside the main story.
How is that laying out panels and including Easter eggs? And I've wondered this when I've spoken to guys like Gene Ha as well, who did it for with Alan on Top 10. So you tell me, where's that line between, having an Easter egg and having it noticed by the reader versus, the little joke taking over the focus of the story panel?
Oh, Rob, that's a good point. I mean, what I've tried to avoid, certain things Alan will mention, Alan's scripts are famously very, very detailed, but there'll be a note on anything else you can think of, put in here. So there's all the principal stuff that the reader needs as information is minutely described by Alan, and he might occasionally say, well, perhaps include this character in the background, or maybe that one. And if I see an opportunity for something that fits in the background without being too distracting, I will do it. What I was mindful of, probably around about the Black Dossier time, was not turning it into what you might call the mad comic opera. where almost everybody is standing next to each other, and it does become a bit too ludicrous. So I'm trying to make people, the fictional characters, naturally kind of mesh together. And in the 60s one I'm working on, that's proving very enjoyable. And because Alan and I are the same age, so we grew up through the same period of books and comics and television. To a certain extent, some of these things in our heads have crossed over anyway, even if in reality they never did. So old TV shows and characters from novels and so on.
It's got to be.
They were a big part of the landscape of growing up.
It's got to be like, and especially in 1969, you're only a couple of years off from the Sgt. Pepper album. So
yeah, it's yeah, and it's we were talking about this when we did the Black Dossier, which was say 1958. Britain's 1958 would have been entirely and unrecognisably different from America's 1958. I mean, it's not just as simple as the clothes and the cars. Kind of income levels made such a huge difference because Britain came out of the Second World War bankrupt.
Yes.
And so, in fact, we were on rationing after the war was notoriously worse than it was actually during the war.
Wow.
The country was, it suffered a very hard winter in, I believe, 1948. And I believe the loans we got from America were only paid off, the war loans were only paid off a few years ago, which is quite astonishing, really, isn't it?
Unbelievable, yeah.
So, Britain in the 50s was a very, very grim and grisly place, which fired up a lot of imagination for people wanting to, it kind of fueled the early 60s, in a way, the 50s, because it was so depressing and so much privation. But our 1969, again, would have been rather different to any American equivalent. Say, London in 69, 70 was kind of garbage-ridden. There was a lot of ugly redevelopment. And of course you had the weird, what we're trying to avoid is what you might call the Austin Powers look of
yes.
the 60s. Because Britain, even the films we made, the kind of swinging 60s films, most of them didn't really accurately reflect what it looked like on the streets. This kind of weird collision of hippies and hippie chicks and very, very serious people who hated all of that, the older generation and the war generation, and still a fair amount of poverty, it has to be said. And like I said, my memory of London, central London, was how much garbage there was on the streets compared to today. It's almost shocking to see how scruffy it was, and kind of falling down as well. But an exciting period, a lot was going on, so it's kind of fascinating.
And I understand for this story too, it being in 1910, you're only a few years removed from, as opposed to the depression that came with World War II in the late 40s through the 50s through the 60s. But in 1910, you're dealing with the aftermath of the War of the Worlds invasion, at the end of the century, and as I said earlier, the coronation of King George. And it is fun to, as you did in the Black Dossier, to suppose that alternate history of if these literary things were truly happening to the world, and have it reflect in your art and in the story. I mean, that's got to be a fun challenge to put all that together.
It does, because we're trying to kind of fuse what you might call in the 60s, even some of the Jerry Anderson stuff, but in a kind of, if they really built it, what would it have looked like? Well, it would have been underfinanced and poorly performed, frankly. Because the Jerry Anderson view was much more what you might call a British American fantasy of what Britain would be like, rather than the reality, which was always, underfunded and underperforming, and a little bit shabby, and usually things that don't work. Like we almost had a high-speed train which took curves at high speed, but always broke down on curves, and they ended up scrapping it.
Oh, jeez.
Because and there's many examples like that. There were monorail vans for London which were completely hopeless. So we've got in some of that stuff, just because it's a good fit. It's a good fit, and it kind of keeps our London kind of realistic, but incorporates some fantasy elements as well, which is fun. But 1910 is so close to the earlier events that the actual look isn't terribly different. There's just a hint of a car in the background here and there and stuff like that, but it's pretty visually similar. And the docks were unchanging until my childhood, really. The Dockland areas always looked pretty much the same.
Well, I do look forward to seeing what you're going to do with Captain Nemo's daughter, because I think you guys are responsible for, as you guys have said in articles and discussions about Captain Nemo, gotten rid of the James Mason image of Nemo,
right,
and gotten him back to, I guess, what Verne truly intended, if not in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, in Mysterious Island. Is that fair? Or?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we were, when we were researching it, yeah, it's, I mean, I think Verne kind of bolted it on in Mysterious Island. He was an Indian prince, Prince Dakar. I think originally he'd wanted him to be a Polish nobleman, but his publisher had talked him out of it, if it might have a negative effect on Polish sales, presumably. But the Indian background we've carried through. He's got an Indian daughter, and she's a very, very good character. She occupies a great part of the story, and we will be following her in later books. But she doesn't figure. She figures briefly in the 60s book as an older lady. But we will be going back and doing her earlier career when we get around to it.
Well, how about one of the fun things about Black Dossier was all the different visual formats that you guys explored. The porn comic that the Tijuana Bible, if it was the world of 1984, and the very Fanny Hill looking section. Right. I mean, so were you involved with that? I mean, how much of that was you, and how much of that was you guys bringing somebody in from a production standpoint to kind of recreate some of that stuff?
Well, what happened in the initial project was we'd finished the second volume, and Alan was going to take some time off, so there was going to be a gap where I wasn't going to be working on League. Then Alan rang me up and said, "Do you feel like doing a source book for League? It'd be 48 pages, and it would just have cutaways of the Nautilus and just interesting stuff about the characters and that." As we were talking about it, and we were talking about how crappy source books often are, how kind of uninvolving they can be, and just full of pin-ups and stuff, Alan devised a story which linked the source book material, but then the thing grew exponentially. It went from 48, 64, 96, and I think Wildstorm put a cap on it when it was approaching 200 pages, because it would just, I'd still be working on it now, frankly, if we hadn't put a cap on it. But what happened after the second volume was a success, and you would want to do a source book. Wildstorm, I mean, essentially they said, you guys can have anything you want. So we thought, great, we'll have different paper stocks, and we'd like a 3D section, and so on. So, and the Tijuana Bible printed on rougher paper and included. So that was built in from the very beginning. The only thing we didn't get, which we were promised, was the vinyl record included. And for some reason, we didn't get a gatefold for the Nautilus cutaway either, which was a shame. But we pretty much got everything else, and we had Ray Zone do the 3D section.
Yes.
But Todd Klein did a brilliant production job on all the typography and stuff, and the assembly that was required, because Black Dossier was a huge amount of work, and a huge amount of headache getting it published, because you probably know the story at the end. I mean, the book had been approved by lawyers and everything was fine. Then at the last minute it was pulled, and it was took about 8 months to get the book out there, and that was really down to the enthusiasm and the hard work and the pushing and cajoling from Jim Lee, who wanted the book published. I think otherwise there was even talk of it never being published, which was a very frustrating period, as you I can imagine.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. No, go ahead.
And kind of prefigured by the books we're working on now are with Top Shelf. It's a shame, but that's things just got very tough. It became more apparent that someone high up could just say, "We're not publishing you." We didn't like being in that position of putting all this work in and maybe someone pulling the plug when it was all finished. It's not a very adult way to live, is it?
No, absolutely. I know people are wondering, and we're looking forward to that Flexel vinyl record. I wonder how many people had turntables that would have been able to play it if you guys had released it. But
yeah, well, Alan was fairly fierce on this. He felt if I didn't have turntables, they should go out and buy one. He's got one, so that's the main thing.
There you go. Will the record surface on this volume, or is it out of place to include it with this stuff?
Alan's talking about doing another record. So at some future stage, when everything's collected, that's a distinct possibility, I'd say. And I don't think. A record got as far as being pressed, and the kind of packing for the black dossier and its slipcase included space for the record to be safely included. It was very much a last-minute decision to pull it, and the kind of one of several final straws, I think for Alan and I. But yeah, I think in the future sometime there will be a record.
Did you sing on it?
No, I didn't. Sadly, no. And I did admonish Alan on Saturday for not allowing me to sing on any of his records.
Well, I have a couple of questions from people who listen to the show. They wanted to know how you've kind of gone into this now, talking about the move to Top Shelf and the difference and everything. I mean, Chris is basically letting you guys, obviously, he's giving you guys carte blanche. Everything that you want is in there. And no, how is it editorially?
And I should prefigure this with it's not just Top Shelf. It's because Alan sort of was created really as an alliance between Top Shelf in the US and Knockabout Comics in this country. It's a co-production.
I see.
So Knockabout distributes it here, and they co-finance it. Basically, that's what happened because Alan wanted a British element to the publication, and with both companies, Knockabout have a long history of dealing with censorship problems and customs and all kinds of stuff like that, from dealing with, I guess, Gilbert Shelton's work on Very Freak Brothers and so on. Mm-hmm. They publish a lot of underground material, and of course Top Shelf did such an astonishing job on Lost Girls. Probably one of the most beautiful comic publications there's ever been. It's just
Absolutely.
Astonishing.
Yes.
And again dealt with all the problems of both distributing a difficult book and censorship, and it was problems with content. They're not put off in a way that the major publishers do tend to throw in the towel rather early if there's a problem, or simply ask you to change stuff. And the minute you start going in for allowing a certain amount of excessive censorship, and then what's that going to lead to? You just start censoring yourself, and the work just becomes kind of homogenized and a bit dull and a bit kind of easy. So we're having a blast working for Top Shelf and Knockabout. They're a good fit. They're a very good fit. But that's not to say Alison Gill at DC Production and Bob Wayne at DC, and I said Jim Lee, who did fantastic job of putting pressure on everyone to get the Black Dossier published. There are plenty of good people who are on our side, but I don't know, that you feel that sometimes there's a kind of maybe a backroom force which is somewhat hostile to the content of our books.
I wonder, too, if obviously the differences between public domain law in the States and in Europe has to play a bit of a factor in terms of what you guys can and can't do.
Yeah, well, so we had all of the Black Dossier was vetted before publication. In fact,
Okay.
the scripts were finished years before publication. It was all vetted, everything was fine, and then suddenly there was this colossal list of problems, most of which were dealt with by Jim Lee. And then, but by this point, Alan didn't want to even discuss the thing. He was so sort of outraged by it all. So I was dealing with Jim Lee, and we were going through it point by point, and there were some very, very minor changes made. I mean, even as tiny and or seem almost inconsequential, like minor colour changes. But the sticking point, and it is a difference between European and American law, was Jeeves and Wooster, B.G. Woodhouse stuff. Where in America, using that was fine, and they said in Britain that it wouldn't be fine. But we pointed out a huge history of using the characters by name years before Woodhouse died, in fact, in tandem with the characters even being originally first published. There's a huge industry in spoofing them, using them, having them as walk-ons, and so on and so forth. So, and as how we used them was such a minor part of the book. It wasn't cover featured.
Certainly.
It's hardly a selling point. It's a text feature. It seemed like an overreaction. So to this day, the book it can't be printed outside of the United States, which is frustrating. It can't be sold officially.
Interesting. Okay.
All for the sake of a little more than a handful of pages, which is very, very frustrating for us. Very, very frustrating. And it must be for the foreign publishers who publish the earlier books and will be publishing the later ones. But there's nothing. We reach a complete impasse with powers that be at DC. They would not, wouldn't give up that point. I suspect a smaller publisher would have done, frankly.
Sure.
I think this was. It felt like an overreaction, to say the least.
I see. Well, tell me, because a lot of times, there's the phrase "the ugly American," and we only know so much on this side of the ocean. So, I am curious about Orlando. I know he figures more prominently now with the story in Volume 3, and certainly after his introduction in the Black Dossier. How well known is that character in Europe, and how much research? Because it seems, again, depicting the different eras in which he appears. It must have been fun for you to do all these different styles and tell Orlando's story in the different historical eras.
Yeah, Orlando was absolutely fascinating. It was Alan's idea to include Orlando. As far as being well known, I'd say actually not well known outside of people who've seen the adaptation of Virginia Woolf's Orlando. There was a movie adaptation with Tilda Swinton, which was actually very, very good. It's a very stylish movie for some years ago at the start of her career. So if you catch that, that's a good adaptation of the book. The Virginia Woolf book, I guess if you read Virginia Woolf, you'd have read Orlando, but how widely read in terms of crossing over into comics, I'd have to say probably relatively obscure, and probably Jess Nevin's annotated books have done more to popularise Virginia Woolf's Orlando than anything else.
Than the books themselves, yeah.
No, it's just when we've got these characters now who, like Mina and Alan, have bathed in a sacred pool, and they've got extended longevity. Orlando's an eternal character, so they can pass through the decades and indeed the centuries unaltered now. So that's very, very, very useful for us. Otherwise, we would have had a problem, of course, in naturally aging. Quatermain was a very old man when we first introduced him, so we couldn't have sustained him as sort of a semi-action character for terribly much longer. And Mina could only track through so many decades before she becomes an old woman. So this for us is a good way of leapfrogging, let's say, decades and even ultimately centuries into the future.
one of my listeners wanted to know if you were at all involved with the League movie, and do you?
No. The League movie. The first I heard of it was when we first talked about doing the book. We were at the early stages of working on it, and said, the people who made the From Hell movie were going to do the League movie. A producer of the From Hell movie, I should say, was going to do the League movie, and I didn't really think much more of it. And then you leapfrog, and I'm busy working on just started working on the second series, I think, when the movie suddenly going into production in Prague. And my only involvement, if you can call it that, was visiting the set in Prague and meeting Sean Connery, all of which was very, very fascinating. And I went to the premiere in the States and in London. But no design involvement, wasn't asked, didn't do anything for it. I liked Steve Norrington, I liked Steve Johnson, the effects guy. I met a lot of great people on the film. Mm-hmm. But what I was hearing from people, including the cast, was they would rather have been shooting the comic. See what I mean?
Yeah, certainly the fans too, absolutely.
I mean, Peter Wilson, who played Mina, said she'd love to have done the scene of throwing the bucket of paint over the Invisible Man, say, from the first volume.
Certainly.
I don't know. I think what ultimately what happened with that film was it's a star vehicle and a star Sean Connery, and I suppose to them they then think, well, who's this woman who doesn't appear to have any powers in our book? I mean, Mina's not a vampire.
Yeah.
She's a very strong Victorian woman, as unfathomable as that seems for Hollywood people to connect with. She actually does have the strength of character to control this pretty fearsome group of men. It seems in film terms they weren't content with that, so you had this bizarre vampire character thrown in. And I don't know. It's an odd thing. I mean, for Sean Connery's last film, I think our kind of drug-addicted Alan Quatermain was a more interesting character, I think, than this sort of odd father-son Tom Sawyer thing they had going for them. But I think we knew at the get-go that they, the minute they say, we love you guys' stuff, and we're adapting it and we're doing everything, it's going to be just like the comic. That's pretty much code for it's going to be nothing like the comic, and they might actually like our stuff, but studios have their own agendas, and stars like Sean Connery have their own agendas, and no, it's a shame. It's a shame. I think the traces of the comic that are in the film came from Steve Norrington. I think they were kind of well into production on the film as the books were coming out, and I think things were dropped back in, like the design of Hyde is relatively close to the comic, and Nemo's close-ish.
I agree.
The Nautilus is nothing like, which I think is a shame. I think our Nautilus was better.
I quite agree.
And was less sort of ludicrous, but and all the Venice stuff, go figure. Cars in Venice. What can you say, really? It's a city of canals and pedestrians. So,
Not to mention a Nautilus the size of an aircraft carrier cruising along the canals pretty easily.
Yes. And it's nice to know the Thames is deep enough to accommodate such a vessel rising up as well, right by the dockside.
Absolutely. No, and I agree, man. I mean, I think everyone agrees it was a missed opportunity to have Sean Connery play your Alan Quatermain, your guy's Alan Quatermain, which was such a complex character, and really could have been an interesting acting challenge and performance to watch. Yeah. So, oh well. I mean, and the good thing is, as I know Alan has said about other adaptations, quoting Raymond Chandler, the book is fine, and that's the good news, and that, the worst film can never damage, really, the greatness of the book. So that's our good news, and we're content with that. Are we okay for a time to talk a little bit more? I don't want to.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I don't want to.
Not at all.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I know, first of all, my first awareness of your work came from reading Marshal Law from Epic, and you and Pat Mills working together. and truly one of my favorite series that you guys have gone back to. And I know a lot of people are wondering what the future may hold for Marshal Law. I know you've talked about it, and maybe you could let some of my listeners in on what's going on.
Well, Marshal Law was very much on our minds a few months ago, actually. We had two, to backtrack a little bit, Top Shelf, Chris Staros did the first ever review of Marshal Law when it came out, and I think 1987 it first appeared.
I didn't know that. That's very cool.
It was pre-Top Shelf existing as a company. He did a thing called the Staros Report, and it was kind of a review listings thing. And he gave us a great review, and it was terrific. And I remember his name; it's very distinctive. Cut to a few years later, and he's doing League with me and Alan, and he mentioned Marshal Law. He said, "Who owns the rights?" And well, we own the rights to all the Marshal Law material. And so he's going to do a big slipcase edition with every single Marshal Law appearance and cover and everything in it for hopefully later this year.
That's excellent.
And someone who obviously he's posted that he's announced he was doing that, and we had various film people approach us, which I have done over the years. Has been interested in Marshal Law, but usually kind of fall away with the kind of a gnat's attention span that movie people often have. they're interested in
the next shiny thing comes along. Absolutely.
But the first sort of overture was from people who wanted to do it with Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. But I believe they wanted to do it at Disney, which was kind of unusual.
A little.
Seeing Marshal Law in a mouse house would have been fascinating, frankly. But I couldn't quite see him as a Disneyland ride or someone walking around shaking hands.
Absolutely, yeah, especially in the all leather outfit with the zipper and everything. Yeah, definitely.
It's a nice thought, though, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
But then, almost immediately on top of that, and the long story short on this was a screenwriter called Rich Wilkes, who'd been in touch with Pat, who's always been interested in Marshal Law over the years and has been sort of tracking its progress through various film people interested in it. He had a pitch for doing it with McGee as director. So I met McGee. He was just finishing Terminator Salvation and in that kind of post-production on that. Fantastic guy. He would have done something, I'm sure, mesmerizingly interesting with it. A great eye for visuals, etc., etc. But again, they couldn't get it together. I think this was, I know this was pre-Watchmen coming out, and there seemed to be a lot of cold feet about adapting comics of characters, especially very expensive to do characters, who perhaps the general public haven't heard of. So that's as best we guess is why it fell apart a few months ago.
Oh,
but it's risen again. There's someone else who's just come out of the woodwork who, may be able to get it off the ground, but we could well be in our Zimmer frames by the time it actually happens, because like I say, we've had one version where they wanted to do Marshal Law, but take out all the superhero elements.
Well,
and you take away the costumes. Well, I did kind of gently point out, you're left with just a guy with two guns, and isn't that the Punisher? Or just about any other guy with two guns.
Absolutely.
In a Hollywood film. And you strip out the black humor. Well, you kind of wonder what was it that attracted them to the thing in the first place?
Yeah, no kidding.
That's pretty much that's what we've got. That's what we do. It is incredibly. It's very violent. I like to think it's very funny as well. And it's very sexy. Take away all those elements, and it was shooting people, and you don't really need to buy the rights to a character to do that. You do it with your own characters. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, and also, I think you and Pat, and it sounds like a lot of, I know Alan Grant maybe shares this view as well. It just seems a lot of you guys who came from 2000 AD and that era of British comics were much hipper and wise to parody the superhero trappings a lot earlier than the rest of us, and maybe that's why when Alan released things like Watchmen and even Miracle Man. They were such a breath of fresh air to us in America, but it seems like you guys were already playing with, the silliness of the superhero trappings a lot earlier and just couldn't wait to get to it.
Yeah, well, with Marshal Law, it had a kind of weird genesis, really, because Pat Mills and I had just done a book for DC called Metalzoic.
I remember it well.
Which people seem in retrospect to like, but at the time it bombed, it absolutely bombed. It was in that kind of big square foreign album format that DC did a few books in. But had a misfortune of coming out almost the same time as Dark Knight, which was the much more attractive, what is now known as the Dark Knight format.
Mm-hmm.
Like a nice square-bound American comic shape. So that thing bombed, and we did a magazine over here called Dice Man, using Nemesis and various characters from 2000 AD, which was a role-playing comic strip book. And that didn't work. So I'd scribbled out an idea of the name Marshal Law and a rough character sketch, sent it to Pat, and said, maybe we do something with this. And we did a kind of Mad Max type of thing, which we sent to Epic, to Archie Goodwin. And then what happened was Archie had warned us about it. He says, Marvel will take a hell of a long time to do creator-owned contracts. It might be months. Well, it in fact took a year. I've no idea why.
Wow.
But in that year, because Dark Knight had come out, Watchmen had come out, Pat has no background of reading American comics, but I do. Keeping the same plot, essentially, as the earlier version, he said, he rang me up and said, why don't we do Marshal Law as a superhero hunter? And I said, well, don't you mean supervillain hunter? And he said, no, superheroes, I hate them. And I said, okay, that's great. I can feel the energy of that loathing. So that's what we did, and Archie, to his credit, went with the amended form of Marshal Law, and Dan Chichester, who was the original editor, was incredibly encouraging on the book, and we just ran with it, and the book, I think it's fair to say, became more and more excessive with each publisher it moved to. There's always a bit of a horror book, Marshal Law.
Sure.
It's always very difficult to find a new publisher to originate stuff, and at the end, it became impossible, because I think the last ones we did were during the last great comics recession, and doing it full colour, painted colour, no one was prepared to pay for it anymore, and it was a shame, really, because we had loads of ideas for Marshal Law, but it became increasingly problematic to find publishers. And actually now, reviewing all the stuff for Top Shelf Collection, I'm surprised how strong it was and how far it went, because I think we'd have a hell of a job getting that material passed today. I think things are a little bit more reactionary in general in the major companies now than they were back then, 10 or 15 years ago. They are maybe being a bit unfair there, but it does seem an awful. They were going out on quite a few limbs with the contents of some of those books.
Maybe with less scrutiny. That would be my only. It seems that the audience is more reactionary, because I agree, not just in comics, but even an American television show like All in the Family, made it through 35 years ago. Try and get something on today, and I don't know how aware you are of that program, but
Well, I'm aware of, because I've seen Seth MacFarlane. I'm talking about Family Guy.
Certainly.
Commenting that old Family Guys in reruns have problems with content, which
absolutely
originally, and stuff they could have done in the earlier series that have great problems or find it impossible to do in the newer. So yeah, I think in general we are living in this kind of slightly Neanderthal age where the clock, things are rolling backwards, which is disturbing, isn't it? It's and the same is true in this country as well, and also content. I mean, just using we had hardly any comic industry left, so I have to comment really on television, which is often far less adventurous than it was a decade ago, and probably was far more adventurous 15 or 20 years ago, frankly. There is a kind of great sort of blandness which has come with us having an escalating number of channels, and less perhaps origination to fill it, and more reality shows and cookery and all the other all the other stuff.
No, I definitely agree. What about some of the other? I know that the League obviously does take up all of your time, and in a good way, and we're happy about that. But I know, again, I go back to some questions that I got, and people were wondering. You mentioned Nemesis. Would there be time in the future and any interest on your part to go back to any of those other 2000 AD properties like Robusters or ABC Warriors?
Well, some of the happiest years of my life, earlier part of my career, were working on Nemesis the Warlock with Pat Mills. It was we were always laughing our heads off at what stuff we were doing with Torquemada the villain and and the Blitzspear and so on. I would have stayed with it for years, actually longer than I did. What happened was I made so little money drawing those strips for 2000 AD, and at a certain point in the early 80s, Dick Giordano and Joe Orlando came over from DC Comics, kind of headhunting artists. I think at that point they'd already got Brian Bolland and possibly Dave Gibbons doing work, and there was this kind of interest in what was happening at 2000 AD. More Americans were seeing it. I think Mike Gold at DC was passing copies around and so on. And we weren't getting our original artwork returned. I mean, I had to go out on a limb when I was art editor up there to get credits put on the different strips, because there was no history of putting credits in British comics generally. So it's really economics that worked against it. We put so much effort into it. We didn't get royalties, we didn't get anything, and it was kind of got beyond the joke, if you can understand that. So now, going back, of course, the publisher of 2000 AD has changed several times since we worked together there. Mm-hmm. It's a different landscape. Yeah, I mean, and we did do a final. I did draw the final episode of the final Nemesis episode ever, which kind of dealt with the prime characters once and for all. But yeah, I think the 2000 AD stuff is extremely unlikely.
Okay.
Marshal Law, it'd be fun to have one final run with a character again, just because we so often talk about him. But that'll be sometime in the future. And League, I'm so pitifully slow drawing League, and it gets more and more complicated with each successive book. So I don't think I'm going to get injected with any kind of Kirby energy anytime soon.
Will there be any visual differences as going back again to like the Black Dossier? I mean, and again, maybe it was more of a production thing. I know the text pieces obviously you didn't do, but from an art standpoint, are there different styles that you're employing for this volume?
Yeah, I'd say the 60s. I mean, I sent Alan the early pages for the next book, and he saw them at a weekend, and he commented on that there's a shift in style. I'm taking account of the fact that the book is set in the 60s, so it has a slightly different look, and the present day one is going to be different again, probably grimmer and grubbier. I should think. So yeah, the styles will shift and kind of change as we move along, and indeed we move back again. We're talking about doing a book in the early 60s after this one, and sort of set in 64, round about, which again would have a different look to it to 69, because things were changing so rapidly in that period. So yeah, the art styles will vary.
I'm a huge fan of a lot of the spy product, spy stories that came out from England in the 60s and 50s, and loved seeing the television Invisible Man acknowledged in the Black Dossier, and the clunkiness of him, and the wires and stuff even being acknowledged. But also, Harry Lime was great to see in the Black Dossier, and Bulldog Drummond. I've seen those Richard Johnson Bulldog Drummond films of the 60s too, and it's neat to see that. And I can only imagine that either John Drake was John Drake in the Black Dossier?
Yeah, he was. He's standing on a staircase in the background of a scene behind Q. He's just standing there. So yes, he will almost certainly make a cameo.
Okay. Well, and is there a number? Would there be a different number 6? I don't want to spoil, but again, McGowan. I'm such a McGowan fan, and I was heartbroken that he passed this year.
Yes, well, me too. And in answer to the earlier question, yes, there will be an acknowledgement.
Fair enough.
Shall we say?
Okay. That's great, man. I congratulate you guys because really, this really is something that I think all fans look forward to with each successive issue and volume. And I really think it was a great move on your guys' part too to tell the story this way and break it up into the 3 sub-graphic novels that will all connect and make a great volume when the time comes. But it will make, just as the Black Dossier was a satisfying read, and again, worth the wait till this point, till 1910, I have a feeling that we're going to feel that way about after we read this, waiting for the successive issues as well. So.
Oh, thank you very much. Much appreciated. The people who follow our books very, very much appreciate. The feedback is always appreciated, and the fact that we can sort of shift it and change its tone and time period and makeup of the group without actually people all just giving up on a book saying, well, we prefer the Victorian ones and we want it to be more like a Victorian Justice League, never changing and endless threats and so on. But as Alan quite rightly said, the original League the centre could never have held, not if those characters. It was always going to ultimately fall apart. But as we've established this idea that there's kind of almost always been a League, we can just make up new groups, but have a kind of core of familiar characters now. And Mina is certainly the heart of the book. And the gratifying thing about signings, I certainly didn't get this much Marshal Law signings, having a lot of female readers turning up. It's very, very noticeable on League how many women enjoy the book. And one assumes it's because it's got a powerful woman lead character, female lead character. I would guess that would be the principal reason. And it's been enjoyable to do a book like this.
Not only going forwards, is there any thoughts to go back to any of those? I know the Dr. Sim group was acknowledged in a photograph, and a little bit more of their details were laid out in the Black Dossier.
Yeah, so kind of like the idea of Prospero's Men and the Dr. Sin group and the Gulliver group who we've
yes,
part of the history. Yeah, but at some point we will be going back and dealing with them. And like I say, really, the one after this is very likely to be Mina's group from 1964, which will be again a completely different and wild collection, which we haven't kind of absolutely figured out the makeup of yet. But
okay.
It's going to be cool. It's just I wish we could do the books quicker. To get around to all these things on a kind of time frame which wasn't geological. But they take as long as they take, unfortunately. But they seem to have a very long shelf life, which is encouraging. People always seem to be discovering the book anew, and we are kind of aware that some people who maybe have given up comics have come back because they've heard about this and. Just like they like the characters, and Alan's such an incredible, gifted writer, and his material is fantastic to work on. Absolutely incredible.
Well, and as a response to the movie, I was able to turn on some people to the book because they were telling me how disappointed they were and that it really was kind of flat. And I'm like, you think that's bad? And then I would hand them Volume 1 and say, here, read it the way it was supposed to be. And I know I've created some new comic readers from handing them
thank you very much.
Volume 1 and Volume 2. Oh no, my pleasure. What about Philip Jose Farmer briefly, if I can ask you about his passing? Did you read the books? I know Alan's acknowledged his reading of the books. I wonder.
I'm certainly familiar with not all of Philip Jose Farmer's work, but some of it, particularly his kind of rather these incredibly lovingly worked out histories.
Yes.
Linking, the Tarzan thread of continuity and so on, and Doc Savage.
Yep.
He's a absolutely fascinating writer. I'm very sorry to hear him passing, as indeed I was of J.G. Ballard. he's obviously he's important to us because so much groundwork was laid out by these people before us, looking at this the possibility of various fictional characters matching up, pairing off, having a similar DNA. It is fascinating.
What do you think, too, of, it seems that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I attribute kind of that steampunk look to a lot of what you guys brought to League. What do you think of some of the, and I don't mean to be disparaging when I say this, but the derivative material that's come after? Have you taken a look at it and had any thoughts on it?
Well, that's interesting. I know Alan hasn't, and I haven't directly. I occasionally see in those previews books and things like that, when the League was first a success, I noticed there were a few kind of similar things, shall we say, without going into any great detail. But my thought was, the look of them, they look like people from TV movies using a Victorian dressing up box. Whereas I think, as God knows, the British can be Bruegel-esque looking, shall we say, at the best of times. But I think Hazard probably reaches people because, I mean, we have ugly people on the streets and we have kind of strange characters, and Mina's attractive, but she's not she's not a desperate housewife type.
I hear you.
Not that kind of attractive. You know what I mean? And
I do.
There's a kind of look to Victorian Edwardian people, which is kind of very specific in the way they wore clothes. Whereas, like I say, the dressing up, I might be a bit disparaging there, but that's the impact it had on me, and I didn't take much notice. Everyone's they're all taking they're taking the kind of superficial elements of League, which is just, it's set in Victorian times and maybe as a female in a mix, and that's not actually what it's all about. It isn't just about the tweed jackets and deer stalkers.
I understand.
And it's very, very complicated, and it seems most people don't really want to do incredibly complicated things. They just want to do, I don't know, airships exploding and stuff, which I can understand, and I'm sure there's an audience for that. But our audience seems to be kind of different, you know, and perhaps get as much pleasure out of the quiet scenes as the big scenes, the explosive ones.
I agree. And actually, it gives me in a moment to congratulate you for a bit of storytelling. I think when Mr. Hyde kills the Invisible Man in Volume 1, I think was a wonderful sequence that was grim and very well told visually and really fun to see. And really, Hyde on the one end of the spectrum and Mina on the other, I think kind of covers because, as you say, I think Mina isn't obviously beautiful. Or you know, in that superficial sort of way,
right.
But it's clearly there in her face, and the grotesque dignity of Mr. Hyde comes through in your characterization.
Some of my favourite scenes in Volume 2 actually all include they're all two of them are Hyde and Mina. One is the early one in the tavern where they're sitting and talking together. He's talking about considering ripping off her head, and and it is such a disturbing scene. I love that scene. I think that was a terrific scene. And Hyde's farewell to Mina on the bridge at the end is a great scene. And in Hyde killing the Invisible Man, well, what was fascinating about that was the editor of the book, Scott Dundee, rang me up when he got the script and told me to be careful with that scene. But I mean, frankly, as the Invisible Man is invisible, and so much of what's happening is in your head. I mean, but a truly disturbing thing about that scene to me is actually how polite Edward Hyde is in going about this monstrous revenge. He's just so charming. It actually makes it much more disturbing than if he was really, really brutal all the time. I mean, people often bring up that scene as a kind of a favourite disturbing scene in comics, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, we're reaching the hour, so I'll let I appreciate that you're even like, oh, are we? That's good. That's good that I don't feel I've taxed your time as.
No, at all. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I appreciate all this interest. I know we only surface for new material once in a blue moon.
Well, maybe after the book comes out and people have had a chance to read it, it might be fun to go back and have a future conversation if you'd be interested.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'll be just as happy to talk about the next book, 1969. I mean, it's like I say, it's all different. So like I say, I do appreciate the interest of you and your audience. It doesn't go unnoticed from our side.
Well, thank you, and I guess Volume 2 will come out at some point in 2010.
It will come. It will. I'm working busily away on it now, but it's a very labour intensive. But I think people will find it's going to be worth the wait. We're certainly enjoying it.
Well, excellent. Well, then we'll plan on a future conversation, maybe later in the summer.
Brilliant, yeah.
That would be wonderful, and I know I appreciate you, getting to a landline and tolerating the gymnastics to accommodate this conversation. So, with a 6-hour difference, it's always a challenge to talk to you guys, but always a pleasure as well, and it affords me the opportunity to again personally thank you guys for the great entertainment and how much we're looking forward to more product from you guys. So, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Much appreciated, John. Thank you.
So there you go, my 2009 conversation with Kevin O'Neill, where I said, "Oh yeah, man, let's talk again." I really blew it. I'm sorry I didn't. He was amazing. His talent, and also you heard how warm he was and giving with conversations. I went to his Wikipedia page and noticed that post conversation, some of the things that he did. He continued to work with Alan Moore. He provided things for Dodgem Logic, Alan's magazine. He and Pat Mills got back together again, and on Serial Killer in 2017. And he was working on Alan's Moon and Serpent bumper book of magic for Top Shelf, as well as cover illustration and design work for Cinematic Purgatorio, the collected edition. All things we could have talked about, man. I'm really sorry it happened, and my thoughts are to Kevin's family and the rest of us fans that are really sad that we lost such a great guy. Kevin O'Neill, everybody. I hope you enjoyed hearing his conversation and hearing his voice again today. More Word Balloon coming up later this week. I'm going to have a conversation tomorrow with Drew Friedman, the wonderful artist. Drew, of course, wrote and drew a lot of great illustrations for Heavy Metal Magazine and many other things, and he has a new collection of tribute illustrations to the people that worked in underground comics, just like himself back in the day, and still do at this point and stuff. So can't wait to catch up with Drew, talk a little comedy and other things. So that's coming up later this week on Word Balloon Live, and a whole lot more. I hope you'll join us. Until next time, thanks a lot for listening. Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions. Copyright 2022.